attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. This is Bruce Vandell with Complete College America. I want to thank you all for taking the time today to join us for our third webinar on our GPS STEM project in terms of getting us sort of to the finish line within each of your institutions on developing GPS for STEM strategies, starting, of course, hopefully soon on many of your campuses. And today we're going to be focusing on the issue of proactive advising. As many of you know, this is, of course, a critical part of a GPS strategy, and we're looking forward to today to talk to you a little bit about how you can go ahead and develop a protocol for proactive advising. I think if you did register ahead of time, maybe some of you don't have this, we'll be sure to send it to you afterwards as well. We did send out ahead of time sort of a comprehensive protocol sort of checklist that you can use, as well as a template that we're hoping that you will all use to help prepare yourselves for developing your own set of strategies around proactive advising on your campuses. We're really fortunate today to have Tim Renick with us from Georgia State University and John Hughes from the College of Southern Idaho. Tim, I'm sure you all know very, very well. He's come out to, I think, every single one of your states, and you've met with him, and he's, of course, been a wonderful resource to us and has done some amazing work at Georgia State on the issue of proactive advising. And John is with College of Southern Idaho, and, of course, they're one of our key institutions as far as GPS STEM and are doing, I think, some excellent work. And we're going to use him as a little bit of a guinea pig today to showcase a little bit of what they're doing, but to provide an opportunity for Tim and John to interact with one another to address some of the key questions that I know that you're all struggling with and are thinking about as it relates to developing a proactive advising protocol. So what our objectives today is really to hopefully give you some sense of the steps that you need to follow to develop a proactive advising protocol, showcase a couple of examples of strategies that Tim is implementing, and also to address some of the key challenges. If we do this well today, there should be plenty of interaction. I do want to encourage everyone during the webinar that if you have a question or a comment, to use the chat feature or the question feature, actually, more specifically, the question feature on your console to let us know, and we'll do our best to get your questions answered. In the past, also, if your question does not get answered, we've actually done a pretty good job of being able to check those questions, and we'll do our best after the webinar to respond to them as well. So don't hesitate to put as many questions in as you have, and we'll do our best to get you answers either online or offline. As you all know, you've been working really, really hard these last several months, and we appreciate all the good effort. Most of you at this point should have academic maps, or at least draft academic maps that you're working with. You have outlined milestone courses as part of those maps, those key essential courses that students need to complete in order to be able to stay on track to credentials. Most of you have done a lot of work on meta majors, identifying which courses or which program to study, I should say, fit within your STEM field or your STEM meta major. Many of you have already developed meta majors for your other programs to study. And ideally, you have done some thinking around default pathways or default scheduling. That is how, and particularly with the meta major students or the first year of your academic program, how you're going to get students in the right set of gateway courses and appropriate entry-level courses for the STEM majors that you are focusing on. And so, of course, all of that is really important work, but it really doesn't have the impact that we want unless you have developed a proactive advising strategy. That is, how it is that you are operationalizing the use of academic maps, meta majors, and default schedules so that students are able to enter and then follow through, find the right path and follow a program of study all the way to college completion. And so today really is the essential last element, key element that we want you to spend some time on. And we know that there's a lot of challenges around this. This is not an easy thing to do. Advising resources are limited. Oftentimes we're talking about strategies that would benefit from technology. But our goal here is to get you going, to know that there's a lot you can do, but really to focus on what is possible in the short term, thinking about what you're able to implement ideally by this fall to begin to interact with students and better utilize some of these tools that you've developed on your campuses. If you took a look at the protocol that we sent around, there's really 4 main areas that we want you to focus on and that we would like you to do some thinking on and help us with in terms of drafting a protocol that we can provide some feedback to you on. They are really, one is the student intake system. What are you doing when students apply, or orientation to educate students about academic maps, about meta majors, about default schedules, about the systems that you are putting in place for your GPS system. So we're going to talk a bit about that. Obviously, the most important, probably central part of your advising is how do you get students to identify a major, and what you do for students who have decided, already have a clear sense of what their program of study will be, as well as those who are still undecided, and how you can leverage meta majors or other strategies to help students make a choice in a timely fashion of a program of study. And then the last 2 areas are a protocol for how do you track student progress. How is it that you use your milestone courses or other types of sort of benchmarks to ensure that students are staying on track on the path that they've chosen, or make a choice of a program of study in a timely fashion? And then lastly, and very importantly, what do you do about students who maybe choose a path and then need to make some changes, either because they've made their own choices or because their academic progress is not where they'd like it to be or where your institution would like it to be, and so you need to engage students about considering other pathways for them, and ideally, of course, for the purposes of GPS STEM, to do so within a STEM field, and so students aren't completely diverting themselves away from their initial goals if we can help it. If they still want to stay in STEM, how do we encourage them to do that, maybe in a different program of study? So we're going to talk about all of those. Like I said, you will see detailed examples of strategies you can employ under each of those in the template, and also the protocol that we sent around earlier. And like I said, if you don't have it, we'll be sure to get it to you after this webinar. So that's really the big picture on all of this. And what we want to do now is shift over to Tim and have Tim talk to us a little bit about the work that's been going on at Georgia State. And then from there, we'll go on and have the presentation from John. So I think we're ready to go. Tim, take it away.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to be here today. Happy to talk through a few of these issues and a few of the Georgia State examples. And I do want to emphasize a point that was just made by Bruce, which is that what we're talking about this afternoon is not the minimum of what you have to do, but the ideal of what you could do. And I'm going to give a lot of examples, some of which that have been built up over Georgia State over really a 3 to 4 year period. And I don't think the expectation need be that you have everything in place to start with. But I am going to reflect on some of the lessons we've learned about what works and what doesn't. As most of you know, we track data carefully, and so we actually have some supporting data to indicate what has been effective or not. And I'm going to start off with some basic lessons that we've learned. I'll go through 8 lessons that we've learned by using proactive advising. And lesson number 1 is to actually use meta majors. We found these work much better. In fact, we have moved to a model at Georgia State where every freshman coming in outside of our honors program is expected to choose a meta major and to take a block schedule as part of a freshman learning community for the fall. We group them in groups of 25 students each, and they take all 5 of their fall courses together. In some cases, like English composition, they're the only 25 students in the class. In many other cases, they're mixed in with other students. But they build partnerships, relationships, and study teams via the way we set up the courses. But we were doing that for years. And where we really started to see productive results was when we began to divide these freshman learning communities into meta majors. You can see on the screen the meta majors that we use. We consciously include an exploratory major, both because there will be a small subset of students who can't identify an allegiance to any one of the other groupings, and also because we want to signal to the students that this is exploratory. This is not a final resting place. This is a temporary place you will be before you find your degree program. But what's nice about these clusters as far as helping students find the right major is multifold. One, in many cases, the courses required for the first 2 semesters are exactly the same. So whether you're a sociology or history or a political science major in the social sciences, you can come up with a sequence of courses that all these students will be required to take, and that will serve equally towards advancing students in each of the programs. Then you might ask, well, why arrange them by meta majors rather than just by majors? What we found with the type of students we serve at Georgia State, we have 60%, almost 60% Pell students and over 60% non-white, lots of first generation, lots of low-income students, is that even the students who come into the university thinking they know what they want to major in are often mistaken and often come to a quick conclusion that's not what they want to in fact pursue. I mean, we've seen, and I'm sure you have examples on your campus, of the person who's sure they want to be an accountant coming in and thinking, you know, that's the career for me, and then realizing very quickly into the first course or two, oh, I didn't realize there was so much math required. Well, we want to get those kind of revelations to happen as quickly as possible, ideally in the freshman year. And the meta majors are a great structure for that because, one, we have students who are grouped together who have like general interests, so they might be interested in the social sciences, they might be interested in business or education, but haven't yet necessarily defined a very specific path. And even those who have designed a specific path, what you can do with the meta majors is use it as a platform to push the information that you know these students need to have. So since we've developed meta majors, not only has registration occurred much more peacefully and simply, because you don't have that anxiety of students having to pick a major and then pick 5 different courses that they need to register for and put together a schedule. We give them a block schedule, and we're 100% sure that all of those courses will apply to their degree program. But you also, throughout the semester, then have a captive audience for your academic departments and for your programming. We have, for instance, all of the social sciences set up events in which they can help explain, the faculty and current students, and in some cases the alums come back to explain what does it mean to major in political science, and how is that different from majoring in policy or in sociology or in history. What can you do with these various occupations? The goal for getting students in a major is not to get them in a major quickly, it's to get them in the right major the first time, because the worst thing for progression is going to be students bouncing around. And so you get good results from the block scheduling. You get really good results in beginning to shape the student's major by pursuing these meta majors. Lesson number 2 is just what I'm talking about now, is the trick is to try to fit the student in the right major the first time. The worst thing for the ultimate graduation rates is going to be having students 3/4 of the way through their academic program who are coming to a revelation that they need to switch programs. The more low-income students you have, not only the more likely that is to happen if you don't engage in proactive advisement, but it's going to have an even more damaging effect, because these are the students who can least afford to compile a whole bunch of courses that don't apply to their degree program, and quite literally can't afford it. They run out of funding before they graduate if they have spent their time spinning their wheels and bouncing between major to major. So you need some strategy for how you're going to fit students into the major. It has to be more than what do you want to major in and what do you like doing. There can be a whole suite of options that you employ, and indeed at Georgia State we do employ a whole suite of options. There are diagnostic tests that you can have the students take that will give you information about their interest and proclivities and so forth. But I would recommend you have at least some component of some degree that takes a look at their academic strengths and helps to match a student to major based on that. Whether this is a transfer student or a student who's just starting out in college for the first time with you, there's some academic record that they have. And it's not the case that you want to go in and say, just because a student has a low math score, that there's no way they can be pre-med, where they can get into biology. But on the other hand, there has to be some realistic assessment of the connection between the student's background, what they have skills in, and their major. And what we've found at Georgia State is the students really appreciate this conversation. On the screen you can see the major matcher that we use that takes grades from previous courses and looks at, based on predictive analytics, how like students at Georgia State have done with these type of grades depending upon the different majors. And this kind of information, although more perhaps nuanced than the data that you might have available on your campus currently, is useful for not just the advisor but for the student themselves. We have a lot of problem just having an advisor sit down and say, you know, you don't really have the skills to succeed as a pre-med student. But having this kind of data and having some kind of argument that bases the recommendation in actual performance has made these kind of conversations go a lot more smoothly and have made the students much more receptive to the recommendations coming forth. Lesson 3 is to link the majors to the careers. Another way to make sure that the student has landed in a major that they'll stick with throughout their academic career and ultimately graduate in is make sure they understand where they're going with this major. This can also help with the student's motivation. But to have a conversation about the kind of careers available from these majors is, I think, not something that you want to hold off on till they become juniors or seniors or till they're about to graduate, but is something that they should be thinking about while they're choosing their major. And there's wonderful data out there now. We have the ability, for instance, using large data sets to track undergraduate majors by CIP, by zip codes, and actually see where students end up. We have a list at Georgia State of the 40 top careers for every one of our undergraduate majors. And it's eye-opening, especially for first-generation students, to realize that there's a range of things that you can end up doing with these various majors. And it also often suggests to students deficiencies they might have in their own preparation. So for a biochemist, for instance, sure, you need a major in biology or chemistry, but you also need computer science skills if you actually look at the job descriptions and the kind of background necessary and so forth. And so it can help to create a roadmap for the student moving forward. Lesson number 4, one that you know well and you've heard lots about, but it is very, very important, is really the cornerstone of proactive advising, is make sure that the students have a major map. You don't necessarily have to map out every single course. At Georgia State, we've looked at data and picked out the milestone courses, the courses that really are the success of in these courses are the difference between students graduating or not. This is the chemistry example in front of us, but it is absolutely crucial that the students not only have these maps, but that they be used regularly and in a proactive fashion. What we found at Georgia State, and it's a sobering data point, is now that we're tracking registration for every student, is even students who have come in for advisement in a given semester, only about 65 to 70% of them actually follow through on the advice they get during that advisement session. So you may speak to a student in February saying these are the 4 courses that you absolutely must take this coming semester, and it turns out that while most of them will register for those 4 courses, there's a huge group, 30 to 35%, who end up registering for something else. So you need to have some sense of where the students are headed, and it's not enough just to hand them the map, although that's an essential first step. It is also essential that you make use of these maps in a proactive fashion. Lesson number 5. You need to keep an eye on, even after a student has selected a major, emerged from a meta major, selected a specific major, is beginning to pursue a map, whether they are performing in a way that's going to ultimately allow them to succeed in that major and graduate. And unfortunately, despite our best efforts to match students based on ability to major, there is a subset, and it may be as high as 20%, who, when they actually get into the courses and begin pursuing the degree, don't perform well. Doesn't mean that they can't graduate in any major, but it does mean that they're having problems in the major at hand. And there are a lot of early warning signs. These predictive analytics systems that are being marketed now are set up to point these out, but it can be very simple campus data that you use in order to begin to guide you in these ways. Long before we became a client of Education Advisory Board, we were already looking at data like you see on the screen in front of you, the predictive value of the grade a student takes in the first course of what becomes his or her major. And we were struck by the fact that there was so much useful information and even this simple data that we weren't making use of. So as you see, and some of you have heard this example from me before, political science majors at Georgia State who get an A or B in their first political science course, graduating at over a 75% clip. Students who get a C in that first course, graduating in a 25% clip. So we're talking about a 50-point drop in graduation rates. And the reality is we were doing absolutely nothing with that information. We weren't reaching out to the student. We weren't trying to diagnose why they got a mediocre grade in a course that is supposedly going to be their main area of interest and pursuit throughout their academic career. And just simple data like this so you can track and see if there are problems and try to address them early. You're going to have far fewer students moving around from major to major after the first year if you use this data correctly, because it's going to allow you to address problems. The student in political science who gets a C in their lowest level political science course, they may have problems with reading or writing. And if you can diagnose those problems before they start taking upper level courses, then they actually may be saved as a political science major. And that same lesson is even more true for, say, the STEM fields, where a student who may have weak math skills, if you sit back and wait, then by the time these problems really manifest and they're taking upper level chemistry and so forth, they're going to have a string of D's and F grades and probably have to drop the major. But if you can diagnose that math problem early and address it, they're much more likely to succeed in that more difficult material. Lesson number 6, common sense, and very important to proactive advising, though. You have to be tracking student behaviors in one way or another. You have to be watching what they're doing. There's different levels of it. Some technologies allow you to track centrally and electronically almost everything that's going on the campus and everything a student is doing. In other cases, you just want to look at basic things like what grades they're receiving when the grades come in. Or you might look at attendance issues or early warning signals from direct faculty members. But proactive advising is not a system that's set up on seeing each student when they hit 45 and 90 credit hours. That is waiting too long and being too passive in the face of problems that can be addressed. This is an example on the board of on the screen of one of our actual students who we didn't serve very well. Came in as a pre-med student, was, according to our maps, was supposed to sign up for a chemistry class his first semester, didn't do so. According to our predictive analytics, was supposed to get at least a B- in his first math course, didn't do so. The only thing he did his first semester that kind of fit with our current analytics was got the minimum grade he needed in his English class. But at the time, we didn't have any tracking going on, and we didn't have proactive advisement, and so this student was just allowed to progress. And that word is used very loosely because what he ended up doing is just digging himself deeper and deeper into a hole. The hope of proactive advisement is that these are the very students who can be success stories, because if you see what's going on early on, you're tracking in some way, you can intervene and hopefully actually allow them to succeed in the field they want to succeed in. Lesson 7. Difficult one, but absolutely essential. Make someone responsible. It does take a village to get a student graduated from a college or university, but it also takes somebody who has ownership of a student to really be responsible for tracking them day to day. This is a challenge as far as resources are concerned and staffing is concerned, but we found that our numbers began to improve in significant fashion when we moved to a model where every single student, degree-seeking or not, part-time or full-time, transfer or freshman, was assigned a specific advisor. We have their names in the system. Anybody on campus can see, if they call up a student, which advisor is assigned to him or her. Every student, when they sign on to our web page and our portal, immediately will see a screen that includes information, including their advisor's name and contact information. Making a specific person responsible for each student is critical to making sure that this student is interacted with in a timely fashion. Make sure that the student is monitored, and the flip side as well. If you're serious about this and wanted to make a difference, you've got to monitor and evaluate your staff people by their effectiveness in doing this kind of tracking. I've been to campuses where they say, oh yeah, we've assigned each student to an advisor, and then I ask, well, you know, how are different advisors doing? And they say, well, we don't know, we don't track that, or they would resent it if we were, you know, tracking who was meeting and what interventions were occurring. Well, if you don't track how your advisors or who's responsible for the interventions are interacting with your students, then it's very unlikely that this is going to have much impact. And my final lesson, lesson 8, is to have a plan B, that despite the best intentions, some students will not succeed in the major that is selected for them or that they select mutually with your campus. And you need an out. You need some other plan for them. That includes making sure you design programs so that they're not open-ended. We had a few years ago at Georgia State a disastrous kind of academic requirement in our business school, which is a large major at Georgia State, where the requirement was to be a business major, you needed a minimum GPA of 3.0. And so one semester we had over 1,000 students who were registered for classes at Georgia State who were business majors but ineligible to take any courses that would progress them in their major because their GPA was below a 3.0. We've gone to an alternate model where now at the end of the freshman year there are certain markers, and if the student has met the markers, they're in the business program. If they haven't met the markers, they're out of the business program. Seems harsh and cruel. We like to give, you know, students multiple chances and so forth, but it's actually much more student friendly, because by making a clear decision and have a marking point and saying you're in the program or out of the program, you're actually giving the student a much clearer, all of the students a much clearer path forward, and giving them the chance to succeed instead of spinning around for years and years. We've also hired a cohort of transition advisors. These are one of the problems with structurally is that if a student's not succeeding in their current major, what a lot of campuses do is send that student to an advisor or a faculty member in their current major, who is often the person least equipped to be able to talk to them about the other alternatives out there. So we now have a cohort of transition advisors who do nothing else but talk to students about effectively and efficiently using the courses and the work they've done in one major to transition to another major if that turns out to be required. So in my last couple of minutes, I'm just going to talk about why we might want to pursue these lessons and what kind of impact they have. And if you look at the next screen, you know, the reality is that these type of interventions can have very large impacts. We take this very seriously at Georgia State. As you see, we've had almost 34,000 different interactions with students, proactive interventions that have been started by our advising staff over the last 12 months alone. In 2,000 cases, it was just a matter of getting students into the right courses during registration, something else we monitor. In many cases, almost 7,000 discussions about majors and so forth. But this is large scale, and it can have large impacts. As you see on the next screen, before we began this suite of proactive interventions, we were at around 83–84% semester-to-semester retention rate. We've been able to increase that almost immediately when we began the high-level interactions by 4 to 5 points. And that's not only great for the students. We're talking about with 32,000 students enrolled, hundreds and hundreds of additional students who are staying enrolled. It's great for the university revenues as well, because all those students who are now being saved are also paying tuition and fees for an additional semester. The next screen, you'll see some other positive impacts that we have, ever since we've been ramping up our proactive advisement efforts, increased the number of credit hours that our students are enrolled at, despite the fact that 90% of our students still work and the Pell numbers have grown. The credit hours they're actually accomplishing and succeeding in is going up, as well as the percentage of the hours they attempt that they're successful in going up at the same time. And finally, as far as some metrics are concerned, credit hours at completion. Being the largest transfer recipient school in the state of Georgia, we have students graduating with far too many credit hours, and these students can ill afford it. And what we've seen is significant declines over the last 12 months or so in the number of credit hours it takes for a student to complete their degree requirements. Final slide I have for you is just hopefully uplifting and optimistic about the power of these kind of interventions. It shows that these type of approaches can make not just a modest difference, but a huge difference upon your outcomes. And the most important outcome is, of course, getting students to the point of graduation. And what's even more encouraging from the Georgia State example is, even though none of these programs and nothing that I've mentioned this afternoon is targeted by race or ethnicity or gender, what we have found is the students who benefit the most from these sorts of interventions are the students who had been at greatest risk under our prior circumstances. So who's going to benefit from being given added guidance about how to map out a program of study, how to pick the right major, how to make the right course, choose the right courses, and so forth? It's going to be low-income, first-generation, at-risk students. Overall at Georgia State over the last 5 years, we've increased conferrals by 30%, which is great. But for African Americans, the number has been 59%, for Pell students over 90%, and for our Hispanic students by almost 200%. So these type of interventions can make a real difference.
Great. Thanks so much, Tim. Great stuff as always. We do have a bunch of questions. I'd like to get at a couple of them and then shift over to John if we can. The first question comes from Shawnee State, and it has to do with using the term exploratory meta-major. And if you could explain a little bit about why that would be different than, say, having a student be undecided. And won't students sort of default into that meta-major maybe more often than we want them to? Explain a little bit about how sort of functionally that operates.
Yeah, we've actually found that that given the choices in front of them, and given the fact that most students do come in with some idea of what they want to major in which case they get naturally slotted into the meta-major that covers that umbrella, that we haven't found the exploratory category overused. This past fall, under 10% of our incoming freshman class were ultimately placed in the exploratory category, so over 90% in one of the substantive majors. And exploratory rather than undecided because, you know, words do matter. And what we're trying to tell and signal to the students, which is exactly what happens, is if you choose or are slotted in this particular meta major, you're going to spend a lot of your time and effort exploring different options and trying to find what a good fit is for you. I don't think it's productive if somebody is truly undecided to say, oh, we're going to stick you in social science or we'll stick you in humanities. So for that small minority, we found it's very useful to tell them that for the next semester or two, and many of our freshman learning communities extend across the whole freshman year, 2 semesters, you're going to be in the process of exposing yourself and getting exposed to the options out there and needing to make a very important life choice.
Let's do one more question. How did you go about determining which courses are the predictive courses that you described?
Well, we've gotten fairly far advanced in this area, I must say, and what we've done is allow the data to tell us. In some cases, the data has countered deeply held intuitions. For instance, our nursing faculty was absolutely convinced that one of the courses that a pre-nursing student needed to take so they could see whether they were on the path to being, you know, a good candidate to be in the bachelor's program was physiology and anatomy. That was seen as a cornerstone course and very representative of the work that the nursing student would do in subsequent courses. We looked at the data and found that wasn't the case, that the predictive value of a grade a student gets in physiology and anatomy for a nursing student is actually low compared to the predictive value of the grade they get in their basic chemistry course or their first math course they take. That was a revelation because it allowed us to do such things as push the physiology and anatomy course later in the curriculum so that not all the pre-nursing students have to take it, and we can make judgments about which students are admitted into the nursing program based upon core courses that will apply to any major that the student may pursue. But I will say that you don't need to necessarily have 2.5 million grades and all these sorts of analytics to make these judgments. Look at some basic markers that are true almost across the nation. And one of them I've already shared with you today. Look, for instance, at the grade a student gets in the first course they take in their major. It's not just at Georgia State. It's every institution we've looked at where that grade can be highly predictive. You get a couple of those, and that's all you need is a couple of those, and that can really help shape the conversation with the students and get them into majors that are a better fit.
Great. Thanks a lot, Tim. We'll have hopefully a few more minutes for questions at the end. I know that there are some that haven't been answered yet. But what we want to do now is shift over to John Hughes at the College of Southern Idaho. John is one of your colleagues. He's working on the GPS STEM strategy at CSI and has done, I think, some really interesting work. We wanted him to show a little bit of what they're doing or what they're thinking about there at CSI, and then shift into a bit of a dialogue between John and Tim about how they might better develop a proactive advising protocol at his institution. So, John, take it away.
All right, thanks, Bruce, and thank you, Tim. That was a fantastic presentation. I know, probably like everybody else, we were taking tons of notes here, so thank you for that. I'd like to introduce our team here. Cesar Perez is from our advising office, and Dr. Steve Vaughn is our instructional lead. So they'll jump in and out as I do the presentation. What I'd like to do, first of all, is start with a brief overview of CSI. And then I'll move to discuss CSI Student Success Model. That's a new model that we have here at CSI in our plan and in our discussions on how to incorporate proactive advising strategies through the various stages of the student experience. And then last, I'll try to wrap things up and bring everything together, tell you where we are, and then throw some questions at Tim and open it up for dialogue. So just some background information about CSI. We're located in South Central Idaho in Twin Falls, Idaho, and we're one of 4 community colleges in the state. Our fall FTE was just over 3,900, and we had a head count of just over 8,300 students, which is about 4% down compared to the previous fall. Nearly 70% of our students enroll in one or more remedial classes the first semester. Most of our students are first-time low-income students. We do have an advisory center with 6 advisors, and then faculty are contracted to advise students. We do offer associate degrees and certificates. Last January, CSI hired a new president, vice president, both of whom have been at CSI for many years, so both are very familiar with the CSI culture. Since they had significant experience with CSI, the administrative team quickly recognized that we have many disconnects with students as they move through their educational pathway. So this past spring and in the early summer, we took some steps to improve engagement with students. So we reorganized many of our offices here on campus. We reorganized student services, and then just last week we hired an associate vice president of admissions. With some reorganization, we also introduced several institutional initiatives, and one of those initiatives was a student success model. That model focuses on student experience through 6 stages of the student success pathway, and those 6 stages being recruiting, where they identify interest in the CSI, moving from the 2nd stage to connection, where they actually apply and are admitted to CSI, a 3rd stage of entry, where we have them select a major and they enroll in classes, and then moving through progress of 45 credits to completion of 60 credits or the degree. And then we also have a last stage of outcomes where we review that process. You can move to the next slide for me. So what I'd like to do is spend just a little bit of time talking about how proactive advising strategies fit within that student success model. I think with our new administration, we quickly recognized the disconnect after students were admitted to the college, or once they were finished that 1st stage. It wasn't untypical for us to have a student apply to college, be admitted, select a major, enroll in classes, and then we would have no engagement with that student until really the 1st day of classes. So to engage the students, we implemented a couple of strategies this summer. So in that connection stage, that 2nd stage, we offered a couple of items. We started SOAR. SOAR stands for Student Orientation, Advising, and Registration. These were offered to new students. It was not mandatory. It was recommended. It's where a student comes to campus and gets an orientation, is connected with an advisor, registers for classes. Other strategy that we utilized this summer was convocation. Again, this was for new students. It was not mandatory. it was recommended. This is where we invited students and their families to come to CSI a week before school started and joining the celebratory introduction to their student experience. Along with those two, we also offered late night registration just before the fall semester started. What we did is we opened up the campus from 5 to 10 o'clock at night and encouraged students to come where they could take placement exams, get advising, do registration, get their books, those types of things. So those three strategies we try to incorporate to try to capture students or engage in students just before the fall semester. And to be honest with you, what we learned from that is that we weren't really connecting with a lot of students. Between SOAR and Convocation, we had 2,000 new students this fall. We connect with probably about 300 students. So although we captured some students or engaged in students, we weren't engaging in very many students. The other thing that we learned is that to use SOAR and Convocation as we move forward will be really tough to sustain. So as we look at trying to capture and engage those 2,000 new students, what other methods could we use? So we're in current discussions about moving away from recommendations into mandatory. So now in that second stage of the student success model, we're looking at implementing mandatory online orientation. And then once students complete mandatory online orientation, they'll move to mandatory advising. Okay, next slide.
So, John, real quick, you are sounding a little bit muffled, so I don't know if there's a way you could get a little closer to your receiver. That'd be helpful.
Okay, maybe better?
Yeah.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So what I'd like to do next is talk a little bit about that third stage, the entry stage. Currently in this stage of the student success model, students select a major or apply for a program and then register for classes. And what we have right now is we have 140 majors at the institution. And so what we've learned is that we all know that students move in and out of majors frequently within the first semester and certainly within the first year. So we realized that in this important stage that probably not starting with majors and moving to meta majors or what we're calling focus areas is our plan. And then on the right-hand side, you can see the list of our focus areas. And really based upon what Tim's information today, we'll probably revise our general studies to looking at exploratory studies. Next slide. And then continuing on with that third stage, again, we're moving to looking at the focus areas. We talked quite a bit about default schedules. We're not quite sure we can handle default schedules. We don't know if we have the systems in place, although we know that the success of the default schedule is critical. As students move through that third stage, that entry stage, from completing 15 credits the first semester to 30 credits the first year, we have in place academic maps. We've had academic maps in place for several years. What we've done this past fall is we've revised our academic maps to include key milestones. We've included other information such as career opportunities. We've included information about department scholarships and scholarships outside of CSI, so we've bolstered those quite a bit. We're actually going to meet today and look at another revision of our academic maps. I think we're going to include more career information or a block of career information up in the introductory paragraph, as well as student outcomes. So we're really excited about our academic maps and think that they'll give our students and certainly our advisors good information. And then we'll use these academic maps as students progress through really the first year into the second year, completing 45 credits and moving from the 45 credits to completion with a degree or 60 credits. I guess, I know that's a quick presentation, but as we talk about it, really what we try to do here at CSI, I think especially since we have a new administration, is we're trying to recognize that we don't have a real good model in place to engage students. We've taken steps to address that. So we've addressed or implemented a student success model that engages students through 6 stages of their educational experience. And then what we're really trying to do is implement proactive advising in those 6 stages. So we're moving towards focus areas. We have in place academic maps. I think our next step is to communicate that to the college. We've already had discussions about moving both focus areas and academic maps to our online catalog. So we're making some pretty good steps. So I guess to wrap up, I think our major concern is that we have the tools in place, but not the details. So how do we move from the larger picture into using the things that you talked about, Tim, as flagging students when they fail a test? How do we identify students when they drop a milestone class? So we're not quite sure that we have an elaborate system such as the one at Georgia State, but we don't know if we have the personnel or the system requirements or the budget or even the faculty buy-in to do that. So I guess that would be my first question, is one, how did Georgia State move from small group discussion, but really what we're in right now, talking about meta majors and academic maps and proactive advising? How do you move that from small group discussion to college-wide? And then how do you implement an effective communication plan?
John, I think that's a great question. I appreciate your slides and the progress you've already made on your campus. I think in some ways the two have to be taken hand in hand. I mean, how you begin to implement and how you communicate are part of the same puzzle. And my strong advice is look for easy victories and efficiencies for what you accomplish at first. One of the advantages of block scheduling and meta majors is it's one of the most efficient ways of doing proactive advising. And rather than having an advisor have to meet with every single incoming student and work out a plan that fits with his or her major and desire and schedule and so forth, you are ensuring that every student who comes in is taking only courses that ultimately will apply to his or her major. That's a great accomplishment, but the selling point to campus, including your faculty and staff and advisors and so forth, would be this is actually a more efficient way of doing it than the old way of trying to have each student work out a schedule independently with endless amounts of questions and so forth. Because they're going to come in, we're going to do some front-end work to arrange these block schedules, and the students are going to come in and have an easy choice. Which meta major do you want? And once you pick a meta major, which of these various time schedules do you want? Some of the STEM meta majors we have with the 5 courses are mostly in the morning, some might be afternoon, some might be a couple days a week and so forth. And so based on their work schedule and their family obligations and so forth, that's the nature of the pick. But your advisors have just accomplished something incredible, which is getting all your incoming students to take only courses that apply and actually serve to advance them in their major, and easy victory. And that should be the whole way I would advise you think about the interactions to follow. It would be nice to have every time a student is struggling in a class or every time that they may not do as well on a quiz and so forth, some alert to go off. You're telling me that's not realistic for your campus at that point, and I completely understand. We didn't start with those kind of capabilities or anything close to them. But what we started with was the concept that we can do better even with the resources we have. We had overwhelming demand for our advising staff. We've got tons of low-income, first-generation students with lots of academic and financial problems, and our advisors were feeling overwhelmed. And what they were ending up doing when we actually looked at the data was serving the students whose trajectories were least impacted by the interventions they were getting, because they were seeing lots of A students who were so proactive, they were conscientious in seeking out the staff time, and they were seeing lots of D and F students who were on probation and by our policies had to come to get paperwork signed and registration holds removed and so forth for our staff. And they weren't seeing hardly any of the low B, high C students who, if you give them the right advice at the right time, might actually graduate rather than drop out, whose trajectory you could actually change. And so the question we asked was not how can we do everything we'd like to do, but what are a couple things we could do with that middle group of students to be proactive and to make sure that they're getting some helpful advice that will increase their chances of graduating. Again, it can be sold to your faculty and staff as a decrease in their workload, because rather than saying we're going to meet with every single student, mandatory advisement, every student's going to have to come in and talk to somebody when they hit 15 credit hours. Instead, we're saying, no, we're going to look at some data and try to pick out which are the students who would be most benefited by having some kind of interaction at this stage. And if an A student is absolutely fine and making all the right choices, no. Well, why disrupt their life and call them in when they're doing everything they need to do? Let's concentrate our resources on the students who we can really help.
Great. Excellent. Thank you very much. And then I guess if I could ask one more question, Bruce, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Tim, you've had obviously significant experience over the years. Can you talk a little bit about maybe some lessons learned?
Sure. Yeah, this is a process. It's not a kind of initiative that you undertake for a couple months and then you move on to something else. It is, it is basically doing our jobs, which is trying to help students succeed, and that is always going to continue. And so what we've found is every time we do one thing, it opens up our awareness of some other thing that we are not doing right and that we need to correct. And that's a very healthy circumstance to be under on your campus, if you can have those kind of conversations going and some discussion of what we need to do next. It may not be everything you want to accomplish. I have fought the forces on our own campus of those who say, because a system is not perfect, we're not going to implement it yet. Well, what that means to me is that all the students who might benefit from a system that is considerably better than what we have in place now, although maybe not perfect, are going to lose out, and are going to have to wait for some indefinite point in the future till we figure it all out. So I'd encourage you to, take steps and celebrate victories. The one good thing about doing this work on a college campus, and there might be others, but one good thing is that we're in a culture where evidence and results matter. I mean, our faculty are trained to respect evidence, to make decisions based upon data and so forth. So if you can go in after the the next few months and show that some of these new interventions you've introduced have had some positive impacts, lead with those and make sure that everybody hears that and understands that this is just not another dictate from on high, but this is actually making changes that are benefiting students and serving the central mission of the university. My final bit of advice is, as far as kind of how to approach this and lessons learned, is make sure that you not only understand the moral value of what you're doing, but the practical and financial value. The reality is that student success efforts are not just the right thing to do from a moral perspective. They are the practical thing to do from an institutional perspective. And for the people who you don't win over with the moral arguments, you should have the financial arguments close at hand. Figure out what is the added revenue that comes to your institution from increasing the retention rate by 1%. That's a whole nother cohort. If you have 3,000 plus students enrolled, that's another 30 students enrolled for the year with a 1% increase. What kind of tuition and fee revenues and other revenues does that bring in? Because there is a price to these sorts of programs, and there will be resistance from some factions on campus to those prices. But happily, there's also a very potent counter-argument that would say, of all the things universities do, from athletics to auxiliary services and so forth, this is one that may pay the best of all, because every time you succeed, you're not only helping a student, you're also increasing the revenues for the university.
Right. So some really good practical suggestions for implementing steps into our model. Then I guess two quick questions. I don't think they'll take much time. I'm sure the questions that are being asked is, what is your student to advisor ratio, and also what is the student tracking system?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, I will say that as of a few years ago, we were over 700 to 1, and in some colleges, we were over 1,000 to 1 students to advisors. We made, and I led just the argument I was just talking about on campus, that this was bad management and bad money investment on our part to so under-invest in professional advisors. So even at the peak of the recession, when we were getting budget cuts from the state of Georgia, we went through a period of 6 months where we hired 42 new academic advisors. I know that sounds absolutely unattainable on many campuses, but the reality is we made the argument that these advisors would pay for themselves, and they have more than done so. The calculus at Georgia State of the same kind of equation I was outlining a minute ago is for every 1 point we increase our overall progression rate, that's about $3 million a year in added tuition and fee revenues for the university. And you saw some of the charts in my presentation. The advisors came in and we actually raised the retention rate from semester to semester by about 4 or 5 points. So not only did they pay for themselves, the continuing cost of 42 advisors at Georgia State is about $1.6 million. Not only did they pay for themselves, they paid for a lot of other hiring and student support and academic programs across the university. We are using the Education Advisory Board Student Success Collaborative. We were one of their alpha partners, and this January we're going to start piloting a mobile version where students will be able to, on their tablets and phones, be tracking some of the data, career data, and major matcher and some of the other features.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks so much, John. Tim, and John, we have a bunch of questions. We've only got a couple minutes left, so I'm going to see if we can get through 2 of them and kind of group a bunch of questions together. Hopefully you can provide a pointed response. What we will also do is, if it's okay with John and Tim, I'm going to post for you the questions that we don't get to. It would be great if you could provide responses. I will create a document and then make it available to everybody afterwards.
Sure.
So the first question, there's about 3 or 4 in the same category. What do we do about sort of the non-traditional student, the part-time student, the academically underprepared student? How do they fit into these models? And of course, both your institutions have a very significant percentage of those students. So talk about how this model works for those students, part-time students, underprepared students, et cetera, effectively.
Yeah, this is Tim. My first reaction is that these kind of models help these students even more, but you do need to slot them into these programs. So one thing that we've done with our maps, by the way, and this may be a good helpful hint, is not merely track the progression by number of semesters that the student is enrolled, but also tracking by credit hours. So if a student comes in and is only taking a few courses at a time, you can still look at whether they're on pace to follow their map and to progress and graduate by whether they've met the markers at 15 hours and 30 hours, rather than saying that they're already behind because they're 2 semesters in and only have 15 credit hours. I do think some other CCA policies, like the use in remedial classes of co-requisites, fits very well with the major maps and the meta majors and so forth, because more of your students, even if they come in with some deficiencies, can launch right into tracking through the meta major and the major map requirements, even while they're serving some of their remedial requirements.
And I would say that we're struggling with the same questions about part-time students. You know, we have a significant part-time student population here at CSI, and so a lot of those are our same questions. You know, we wrestle, and it's not uncommon for our faculty to say, well, the academic map doesn't address part-time students, and how should it? So we know there's tons of statistics out there that support students moving full-time. We're just wrestling with getting those processes in place so that we can enable students to do so.
Okay, last question, and then we'll have to wrap it up, is around advising, about who's doing the advising, particularly for those students who are, so the transition advising or the pre-major advising. Is it departmental advisors, faculty advisors, professional advisors? Talk a little bit more about sort of who does what jobs as it relates to proactive advising on your campuses.
Yeah, at Georgia State, we're using professional advisors now. We've made the commitment. We transitioned out of faculty being the formal advisors. Faculty now serve as student mentors, but not as the advisors. But I will say that if you have faculty advisors on your campus, that these approaches should be a great efficiency for them as well, because it is not in the faculty kind of guidebook to know the exact requirements for various majors and whether a student's progressing and so forth. The more maps you have, the more opportunities you have for specific interventions and so forth that can be laid out at the university level, the more effective a faculty member might be in trying to advise students through the program. We have a central model for advising. We have one advising center with 70 advisors, but each advisor is assigned to a student, and each advisor also has specialties within the curriculum, so they might be assigned to biology or be assigned to a cluster of humanity majors.
Yeah, and at CSI we have a central advising center. I think I said we had 6 advisors. We actually have, I was just reminded we have 4. So that serves as an initial intake, and then from there students are dispersed to faculty advisors who handle the majority of advising.
Great. Thanks a lot, John and Tim. We are at time. Thank you so much, both of you, for your time today. Thanks, everybody, for joining. A couple of follow-up details. You will be receiving an email from me shortly with, once again, the checklist and the template on proactive advising. We'll also send you the webinar PowerPoints that you can access. We'll also make those available in our GPS STEM Dropbox, which I believe many of you have access to. If not, I will send a link to it to everyone. We will also have the recording available in our Dropbox. So look for that information coming to you very, very soon. I know you've got the holidays ahead and there's a lot on your plate. We're just trying to set some benchmarks for you to hopefully get you through these steps. So we're going to set a target of January 16th to get us the template back to us and then provide some feedback. I think the critical opportunity here is obviously not that you have these things polished up and ready to go by the end of January, but that we take advantage of our remaining time on this project to give you feedback on what you're thinking. So do not hesitate just to put down sort of the big ideas or the things that you're trying to accomplish, that you'd like to accomplish, and that you're seeking feedback on. And so if we can do that by mid-January, I think that would be ideal. Your EDI coaches will be in touch with you on following up on that. And then lastly, we will, for those of you that didn't get your questions answered, I am going to send them to Tim and John, hoping that they might be able to give us some responses, and I'll pull it together in a document that we will also make available at a later date, so you can get some more specific questions answered that I know that many of you had here. So I apologize for not getting to your questions. Once again, thanks again for participating, and we'll be in touch. And if you do, of course, have any questions, don't hesitate to contact us or contact your EDI coach as we move forward. Thanks a lot, everyone, and have a great holiday.